The city never slept, its glittering skyscrapers standing like towering sentinels against the night sky. It was in this vibrant setting that John Wilkins built his import and export empire, a legacy born of years of dedication and business astuteness. While his company prospered, John traveled constantly, expanding his operations and forging new partnerships around the world. During these periods of prolonged absence, his wife Sarah remained behind, her sparkling beauty attracting admiring and sometimes unwanted glances. Mark Stevenson, John's best friend since childhood, was one such admirer. His eyes couldn't help but linger on Sarah's tempting curves whenever they met. John, oblivious to the dark desires that simmered beneath the surface of their friendship, remained confident in the bond that united them. One spring evening, John returned from a particularly long business trip. His eyes sparkled with joy when he saw Sarah, and he wrapped her in a tight hug, breathing in the floral scent he loved so much. "I missed you so much," he whispered, his lips brushing the soft skin of your neck. Sarah smiled, but there was a shadow of hesitation in her eyes. "John, we need to talk." John's heart sank, sensing bad news. They sat together on the couch, and Sarah revealed something that shook the foundation of her world. "I am pregnant." For a moment John was stunned, the words echoing in his mind like a deafening mantra. Then a wave of joy washed over him, driving away all doubts and fears. He hugged her tightly, laughing and crying with happiness. In the days that followed, John floated on a cloud of euphoria. His company was thriving, and now he was going to be a father. Life seemed perfect, a dream come true. However, not everything was as it seemed. Rumors began to circulate around the city, malicious whispers about Sarah's fidelity. Some cruel tongues even insinuated that the child she was carrying was not his. John's mother, Elizabeth, a shrewd and protective matriarch, called him in for a serious talk. His blue eyes, hardened by the wisdom of years, studied his son's face. "John, my son, I need to warn you about Sarah," she said, her voice deep and solemn. "I have heard disturbing rumors about her fidelity. She may be lying about the child's paternity." John shook his head in disbelief. "Mom, you are being unfair. Sarah is the most loyal and loving woman that I've ever known. These rumors are just envy and malice." Elizabeth sighed, her face softened with worry. "I just want to protect you, son. Don't trust blindly, keep your eyes open." But John was determined to follow his heart. He loved Sarah deeply and would not allow unfounded rumors to tarnish his happiness. With a beaming smile, he began planning the wedding, eager to formalize their union and welcome the new member to his family. However, as the preparations progressed, a shadow of doubt began to creep into John's mind. He tried to ignore it, but the seed of distrust had been planted, waiting for the right moment to germinate and blossom into a bitter truth. In the weeks that followed, John floated on a cloud of happiness. He ignored the nasty rumors circulating around town, focusing his attention on Sarah and the wedding preparations. His determination to make his wife beloved was unwavering. One day, while walking through the halls of his company, John was approached by Mark, his best friend since childhood. There was a strange expression on Mark's face, a mixture of concern and hesitation. "John, I need to talk to you," Mark said, his voice deep. "It's about Sarah." John frowned, feeling a pang of irritation. "What about Sarah?" Mark cleared his throat, looking away. "I've heard some disturbing rumors about her. They say she may be, well, deceiving you about the baby's paternity." John's blood ran cold in his veins. He stared at Mark in disbelief. "What? This is absurd. Sarah would never cheat on me. Where do these lies come from?" Mark raised his hands in a placating gesture. I know. It's probably just malicious gossip. But I thought you should know, as my friend." John shook his head indignantly. "I appreciate your concern, Mark, but I will not listen to these baseless rumors. Sarah is the most loyal and loving woman I know. She would never betray me." Mark nodded, a shadow of doubt still lingering in his eyes. "It's okay, John, I just don't want you to get hurt." Over the next few days, John tried to block the rumors from his mind. He focused on preparations for the wedding, eager to formalize his union with Sarah and begin a new phase of their lives together. The ceremony was a stunning event, held in the garden of a colonial mansion. Sarah looked radiant in her white dress, her eyes sparkling with joy as they exchanged vows under the flower-decked canopy. John looked at her, marveling at her beauty, and knew he had made the right decision. After their honeymoon, they returned home, eager to begin their lives as husband and wife. It was then that Sarah shared exciting news: she was pregnant. John could barely contain his happiness. He wrapped her in a tight hug, laughing and crying with joy. All the doubts and rumors were swept from his mind, replaced by the unconditional love he felt for Sarah and the child to come. Over the next few months, John devoted himself to preparing a room for the baby, filling it with carefully chosen furniture and soft toys. He spent hours caressing his growing belly, Sarah talking to the little being that was developing inside her. However, as her due date approached, John began to notice some subtle changes in Sarah. She seemed more distant, her laughter no longer reached her eyes, and Mark, his best friend, was increasingly present in their lives, visiting them with a frequency that John found strange. In the months that followed, John's life was shaken by a series of disturbing events. What was once a journey of joy and anticipation has turned into a maze of doubt and suspicion. It all started with a car accident. John was returning from work when a distracted driver veered into his lane, causing a violent collision. When paramedics arrived, John was unconscious, his body bruised and his face covered in bruises. Sarah rushed to the hospital, her face bathed in tears. She held John's hand tightly, begging him to wake up. And when he finally opened his eyes, his vision was blurred and unfocused. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice weak. "What happened?" "You were in an accident, darling," Sarah replied, stroking his face. "But it's going to be okay. I'm here with you." In the days that followed, John struggled to recover. Doctors explained that he had suffered head trauma, which temporarily affected his vision. Although they hoped his vision would return to normal over time, he would need to undergo a period of rehabilitation. Sarah proved to be an attentive and dedicated companion, helping John adapt to his new reality. She guided him through the hospital corridors, described the scenarios in great detail, and read to him aloud. John was grateful to have her by his side during this difficult time. However, as the weeks passed, John began to notice some strange things. Sarah seemed more distant, her visits becoming increasingly brief, and Mark, her best friend, was always there offering help and company. John tried to ignore the feeling of discomfort that plagued him whenever Mark was around. He remembered his mother's words warning him about the rumors surrounding Sarah, but he quickly pushed them out of his mind. He trusted Sarah and would not allow unfounded doubts to tarnish his love. But then one incident changed everything. One night, as John pretended to be asleep, he heard voices whispering on the other side of the door. Recognizing Sarah and Mark's voices, he strained his ears, his heart hammering in his chest. "We need to tell him the truth," Mark said, his voice tense. "He deserves to know." "No," Sarah responded, her tone desperate. "He would never forgive us. He would lose everything." John felt the world spin around him. What were they hiding? His mind raced to the worst possible conclusions, and he fought the wave of nausea that washed over him. That night, John could barely sleep. His mind was filled with unanswered questions, doubts eating away at his confidence like acid. He needed to find out the truth, no matter the cost. For the next few days, John pretended that his vision had not yet completely returned. He watched Sarah and Mark with attentive eyes, noticing every gesture, every look exchanged, and what he saw left him devastated. There was an intimacy between them that went beyond friendship. Long touches, whispered laughs, looks full of meaning. John felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces, betrayal burning like fire through his veins. He knew what he needed to do. I needed to confront them, expose the truth to the light of day. But how? How could he face those who were once the people closest to him? John spent sleepless nights planning his next move. He needed to be cunning, remain calm and composed. He couldn't let his emotions betray him. Finally, he had an idea. He would call a family meeting, an excuse to gather everyone involved in one place. And there, in front of everyone, he would reveal the devastating truth he had discovered. With a heavy heart, John began to make preparations. He knew this confrontation would change their lives forever, but there was no going back. Trust had been betrayed, and he needed to rebuild his life from the rubble. The day of the big reveal has finally arrived. John had prepared everything with meticulous care, determined to expose the truth once and for all. He called a family meeting, inviting Sarah, Mark, and his mother Elizabeth to lunch at the Wilkins mansion. While waiting for the guests to arrive, John paced the living room, his nerves on edge. He knew this confrontation would change the course of their lives forever, but there was no going back. Trust had been betrayed, and he needed to rebuild his life from the rubble. The first to arrive was Elizabeth, her expression dark and worried. She hugged John tenderly, her blue eyes studying him intently. "My son, what is happening?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "I can feel something is wrong." John took a deep breath, fighting to maintain his composure. "Mom, I have discovered something terrible, something that will shake the foundation of our family." Before Elizabeth could respond, the doorbell rang, announcing Sarah and Mark's arrival. John swallowed hard, his heart hammering in his chest. It was the moment of truth. Sarah entered the room, radiant in her floral dress. Her eyes lit up when she saw John, and she walked over to hug him. But John pulled away, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. "Sarah, Mark, please sit down," he said, his voice sounding strangely calm. Mark gave Sarah a hesitant look, then settled into an armchair. Sarah, confused, sat on the sofa, her hands restless on her prominent belly. A tense silence hung in the air as John stared at them, his eyes scanning each familiar face. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know about your case," he said, his voice firm but full of emotion. "I know this baby Sarah is expecting is not my son." A shiver ran through the room as Sarah paled and Mark gasped. Elizabeth brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "John, what are you talking about?" Sarah managed, her voice shaking. "This is crazy." John shook his head, his eyes hard as stones. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I heard you talking about telling the truth. I know this baby is the result of your betrayal." Mark stood up abruptly, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "John, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," John interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "You betrayed me in the worst way possible. I trusted you, and you stabbed me in the back." Sarah broke down in tears, her hands shaking as she covered her face. "John, please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you." John felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces, but he maintained his determination. He turned to Mark, his eyes flashing with fury. "You were my best friend, Mark. How could you do this to me?" Mark shook his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I don't know what to say, John. I fell in love with Sarah and lost control. It was a terrible mistake, and I never wanted to hurt you." A heavy silence hung in the air as everyone digested the shocking revelations. Then John straightened up, his face a mask of resolve. "Sarah, Mark, I want you to get out of my house right now. And don't worry, I've already called the police to deal with this situation." Sarah sobbed, begging for mercy, while Mark tried to protest. But John remained steadfast, his heart broken but his mind determined. At that moment, the doorbell rang and 2 police officers entered the room. They quickly restrained Mark, who tried to escape, and escorted Sarah out of the mansion. Elizabeth approached John, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She hugged him tight, murmuring words of comfort. "My son, I'm sorry for all this, but you are strong, and you will overcome this ordeal." John nodded, his heart heavy but his determination unwavering. He knew this betrayal would leave deep scars, but he also knew it was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. From that day on, John dedicated himself to rebuilding his life and business empire. He learned the importance of trust and loyalty, and vowed never to be blinded by love again. And although the path ahead was uncertain, John knew he had the strength to face it head on. After all, he was a man who had built an empire from nothing, and nothing could stop him from starting over and finding happiness again.